She pretended to be my friend for 7 years. She was reporting everything to my husband's family. The day Amara found out the truth, she was sitting at her own kitchen table, holding a phone that was not hers, reading messages she was never supposed to see. 7 years! 7 years of school runs and shared meals and late-night phone calls and whispered secrets. 7 years of calling this woman her best friend, her sister, the one person outside of her marriage she trusted completely. And in those 7 years, every single word Amara had ever said in confidence, every fight with her husband, every fear, every private moment, every vulnerability had been typed out and sent directly to his family. Every single word. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you loved deeply, someone you let all the way in, stay with this story. Because what Amara discovered that afternoon was not just a betrayal. It was a 7-year operation. And before this story is over, you will understand exactly why some people never recover from this kind of wound. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you're watching this from. Are you in South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, the UK, the US? Let me know. And if this story hits you somewhere deep, please like this video and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Amara grew up in a small city in Zimbabwe, the kind of place where everyone knew your grandmother's name and your family's business. She was the third of 5 children, quietly ambitious, the type of girl who read books under the blanket with a torch after lights out. She was not the most beautiful girl in the room, but she carried herself with a kind of quiet dignity that made people trust her immediately. That was her gift, and as it turned out, her greatest vulnerability. She met Kofi when she was 24. He was Ghanaian, working in Zimbabwe on a short contract for a telecommunications company, and he walked into the church she attended one Sunday morning like he had always belonged there. They started talking after the service. 3 months later, they were inseparable. 2 years after that, they were married in a ceremony that blended both cultures, her family dancing to mbira music while his aunts tied fabric around their heads and ululated until the walls shook. It was a beautiful beginning, but every beautiful beginning has a shadow it casts that you do not notice until the light shifts. Kofi's family never fully accepted Amara. This was not something anyone said out loud. It was the kind of rejection that lives in silences, in the way his mother looked through her at family gatherings, in the way his sisters spoke to each other in Twi, even when Amara was sitting right there, in the way certain decisions were made about Kofi's life without anyone thinking to include his wife. Amara was too far from home, too unfamiliar, too Zimbabwean. She smiled through all of it. She learnt a few words of Twi. She cooked jollof rice even though she had grown up eating sadza. She tried, quietly and persistently, to belong. It was in the early months of her marriage, still raw with loneliness and adjustment, that she met Sena. Sena was Ghanaian too, from the same region as Kofi, in fact, but she had been living in Zimbabwe for nearly a decade. She was warm in a way that felt immediate and genuine. She laughed loudly and without apology. She knew how to navigate the gap between the two cultures in a way that made Amara feel seen instead of foreign. They met at a women's networking event in Harare, sat next to each other by accident, and by the end of the evening had exchanged numbers and made plans for lunch that weekend. That lunch turned into a weekly ritual, then a daily phone call, then the kind of friendship where you don't knock, you just walk in. Sena became everything. She was there when Amara had her first miscarriage, sitting on the bathroom floor with her, not saying anything, just holding her hand. She was there when Kofi's work stress turned him cold and distant, and Amara needed someone to tell her she was not imagining things. She was there at the school gate, at the market, at 3 in the morning when Amara called crying about something she couldn't even fully name. Sena never judged. Sena never gossiped. Sena always listened. Or so Amara believed. The first time something felt slightly wrong, Amara dismissed it almost immediately. It was during a difficult patch in her marriage. Kofi had been offered a promotion that would require him to relocate temporarily to Accra, and they were arguing about whether the family should go together or whether Amara should stay in Zimbabwe with the children to keep their schooling stable. It was a painful argument, one of those that cuts into the bone of a marriage and makes you wonder for the first time whether you want the same things. Amara had told Sena everything, every word of it. A week later, Kofi came home quiet and tense in a way that felt different from his usual stress. That night, he said, almost in passing, that his mother had called and mentioned that Amara didn't want to move to Ghana. Amara stopped what she was doing. She asked how her mother had had that. Kofi shrugged. He said his mother had a way of knowing things. He did not say it unkindly, but the words settled in Amara's chest like a stone.
She thought about it for a day or two. Then she told herself that perhaps Kofi had mentioned the argument to someone in his family without realizing it. Marriages were not perfectly sealed containers. Information leaked. She let it go. She should not have let it go. Over the following months, more small things happened. Things that Amara had told only Sena somehow found their way back to Kofi's family. A health scare she had not wanted to share widely. His aunt sent her a care package with a card that referenced symptoms she had never disclosed to anyone except her doctor and Sena. A financial disagreement between her and Kofi about a plot of land she wanted to purchase in Zimbabwe. His mother called Kofi and weighed in on exactly the right side with exactly the right details. A comment Amara had made in frustration about her mother-in-law being controlling. Kofi confronted her about it 3 days later, hurt and defensive, asking why she spoke about his mother that way to other people. Each time, Amara searched for explanations. She was sharing too much on the phone and someone was listening. Kofi was telling his family things without knowing the damage it caused. It was coincidence. It was her anxiety making patterns where there were none. But a woman's instinct is a quiet thing, and Amara's would not go silent. It tapped at the back of her mind every time she sat across from Sena and felt the sudden urge to choose her words carefully. She always ignored that urge. She always opened up anyway, because this was Sena, because Sena had been there for everything, because to suspect Sena would mean dismantling something that had kept Amara alive through the hardest years of her marriage. The truth, when it arrived, came the way most devastating truths do, not through confrontation or confession, but from a tiny, ordinary accident. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Amara had come home early from a meeting that had been cancelled. Sena had been at her house. She had a key, of course she had a key, helping to receive a delivery of furniture. Sena had already left by the time Amara arrived, but she had left her phone on the kitchen counter. The screen was unlocked. Amara picked it up, intending to call Sena so she could come back for it. But the screen was open to a message thread, and the name at the top of the thread stopped Amara's breath in her chest. It was Kofi's mother, Ama, the woman who never called Amara by her name, the woman who spent 7 years looking through her like she was made of smoke. Amara stood there for a moment, the furniture delivery still half unpacked in the hallway, the afternoon light flat and indifferent through the kitchen window. She told herself to put the phone down. She picked it up instead. What she read did not land all at once. It came in layers, each one heavier than the last. The thread went back years. Sena had been providing detailed regular reports to Ama about Amara's marital problems, her private fears, her financial plans, her words spoken in anger, her moments of doubt about the marriage. Some of the messages were clinical in their detail, others were editorialized. Sena had added her own commentary, casting Amara as unstable, as someone who spoke badly about the family behind closed doors, as someone who was slowly trying to pull Kofi away from his roots and his people. There was a message from 3 years ago in which Sena had described Amara's grief after the second miscarriage as her being dramatic and using it to control Kofi. There was a message from 2 years ago in which Sena had reported that Amara was looking at houses in a new suburb, framing it as Amara trying to isolate Kofi from his community. There was a message from 8 months ago, in which Sena had told Ama that Amara was considering a business partnership with a male colleague and had described it in terms that implied something inappropriate. That last message made her knees go weak. She read that thread for 40 minutes standing at her own kitchen counter. She did not cry. She did not move. She just read and read and read until she had swallowed the whole terrible shape of it.
7 years. Not a lapse of judgment, not a moment of weakness, a sustained, deliberate campaign. Sena had not drifted into this. She had walked into Amara's life with purpose. Amara put the phone back on the counter exactly where she had found it. She went to the bathroom. She turned on the shower so that the sound would cover her, and she sat on the edge of the bathtub and she cried in a way she had not cried since the night she lost her second pregnancy. This was a different kind of grief. That loss was nature's cruelty. This was a person's choice, a person she had loved. Amara thought about Sena on the bathroom floor with her after the miscarriage. She thought about whether any of that had been real, or whether Sena had been calculating even then, cataloguing Amara's weakness, storing it away, preparing the next report. She could not answer that question, and not being able to answer it was its own kind of devastation. Amara spent 3 days in a state of careful stillness. She did not confront Sena. She did not tell Kofi. She went about her life with the precision of someone dismantling a bomb, every movement measured, every expression controlled. She needed to understand the full picture before she made a move. She needed to know who else was involved, how deep this went, and what had already been done with the information Sena had fed to Ama over 7 years.
She called her cousin Rudo, who was a paralegal and the kind of woman who did not panic, and told her everything. Rudo listened without interrupting. When Amara finished, there was a long silence. Then Rudo said, "You need to make copies of everything on that phone before you do anything else." Amara told her she had already taken screenshots. Rudo said, "Good. Now listen to me carefully, because this is not just a friendship problem. This is your marriage and your life." Over the following 2 weeks, with Rudo's help, Amara quietly traced the damage. She looked back at every major conflict she and Kofi had experienced and matched it against what she had shared with Sena in the days before. The pattern was undeniable and horrifying. Arguments that had seemed to escalate from nowhere, decisions Kofi had reversed suddenly after calls from his family, moments when Mame Ama had inserted herself with surgical precision into vulnerabilities in the marriage that only someone inside Amara's confidence could have identified. The interference had not been random, it had been guided. And then Amara found the oldest message in the thread, buried near the bottom, dated just 2 months after she and Sena had first met. In that message, Sena had written to Mame Ama to confirm that she had made contact with Amara and that the woman was trusting and easy to get close to. She had told Mame Ama that Amara would not suspect anything because she was lonely and needed a friend in a new city. So it had been a setup from the very beginning. Mame Ama had sent Sena, had found her or activated her. Sena was from the same hometown as Kofi's family, had connections Amara had never thought to question, and had placed her in Amara's path. The networking event they met was not an accident. Sena knew Amara would be there. She had sat next to her on purpose. When Amara read that first message, the one from 7 years ago, she felt something shift inside her that she could not name. It was not anger anymore. It was something colder and more quiet. It was the feeling of seeing clearly for 7 years and understanding that the life she thought she had been living had been observed, narrated, and shaped by forces she had never seen. She made her decision. She did not call Sena. She did not send a message. She waited until the following Saturday when Sena arrived at her house as she always did, carrying a container of food she had cooked, smiling in the way she always smiled. Amara let her in. She made tea. She sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where she had stood reading those messages 2 weeks ago, and she looked at Sena for a long moment. Then she placed her phone on the table between them with the screenshot of the first message, the one from 7 years ago, the one that said Amara was easy to get close to. Sena looked down at the phone. The smile did not leave her face immediately. It faded the way light fades when clouds move, gradually and then completely. She looked up at Amara. She said nothing. Amara said, "I need you to tell me one true thing, just one. Was any of it real?" The silence that followed was the longest of Amara's life. Outside, children were playing in the road. A car passed. The refrigerator hummed. Sena looked at the phone. She looked at Amara. And then, to Amara's complete astonishment, Sena's eyes filled with tears. She said, "In the beginning, no. But after the first year, yes. It became real. You became real to me, and I did not know how to stop."
Amara had prepared herself for denial. She had prepared herself for anger, for deflection, for excuses. She had not prepared herself for this. For a moment, the two of them just sat there, the whole terrible wreckage of 7 years between them on a kitchen table. Amara said, "But you kept reporting, even when it was real. Even when you say you cared about me, you kept doing it." Sena did not answer that. She could not. Amara stood up and walked to the front door and opened it. She did not raise her voice. She did not throw anything. She said, "Leave my house. Do not contact me again." Sena left. She did not beg. Perhaps she understood that there were some things begging could not reach. That evening, Amara sat Coffee down. She showed him everything, the screenshots, the timeline, the pattern of interference. She watched his face as he read, and she watched it change the way a landscape changes in a storm, slowly at first and then dramatically. He put the phone down. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My mother did this." Not a question, a statement of recognition. What followed was not a clean resolution. It never is in real life. Coffee called his mother. That conversation was long, painful, and partly in Twi, so Amara could only understand pieces of it. But she did not need to understand every word to understand the shape of it. She heard Coffee's voice break. She heard him say her name, Amara, in a tone she had not heard him use when speaking to his family before, protective, claiming. Mame Ama did not apologize. She maintained that she had done what any mother would do to protect her son. She said Amara had never been the right person for Coffee. She said Sena had only been helping the family understand what was happening inside a marriage they were shut out of. She said all of this without flinching because she had convinced herself long ago that love of a son justified any method. Coffee ended the call. He came back into the living room where Amara was sitting, and he stood in the doorway for a moment before he crossed the room and sat beside her. He took her hand. He said, "I am sorry. I should have protected you better. I should have seen it." Amara looked at her husband, this man she had loved and fought with and built a life alongside for 9 years, and she felt the complicated weight of what his apology both offered and could not restore. Trust, once dismantled to this degree, does not simply reassemble when someone says the right words. She knew that. But she also knew that what had just happened, Coffee choosing her clearly and out loud, was something. It was not nothing. In the weeks and months that followed, Amara and Coffee went to counseling. It was not comfortable. It surfaced things that the 7 years of interference had buried and distorted and warped out of shape. There were arguments that had nothing to do with what Sena had reported and everything to do with what Amara and Coffee had never found words for on their own. The counseling was hard. It was also slowly useful. Mameyama's relationship with Coffee did not recover quickly. He was not cruel to her, he was not that kind of man, but a distance opened up between them that had not been there before. He had seen clearly and in writing what his silence had cost his wife. That knowledge changed something in him permanently. As for Sena, Amara heard through mutual acquaintances that she had left Zimbabwe about 4 months after that Saturday morning. Gone back to Ghana, some people said. Others said she had moved somewhere else entirely. Amara did not look for her. She did not want to know where she had gone. She only wanted to stop seeing her face in the spaces where the friendship used to live. At the school gate, in the market, in the seat beside her that was now just empty. The hardest part of recovering from a betrayal of this kind is not the anger. Anger at least has energy in it. The hardest part is the audit, the going back through every memory of warmth and laughter and connection and asking, was that real? Was that real? Was any of it real? That question followed Amara everywhere for a long time. She asked her therapist about it. The therapist said something that stayed with her. Even if the friendship began as deception, the moments you experienced were real to you. Your joy in them was real. Your love was real. That cannot be taken from you. Amara held on to that. She did not know if she fully believed it, but she held on to it. She rebuilt slowly. She let herself be choosy about who she trusted, and she stopped apologizing for that choosiness. She invested in a few older friendships she had let go quiet during the years when Sena had occupied all of that space. She started her business, the partnership that Sena had tried to sabotage by insinuating something inappropriate to Mameyama, and it grew steadily and on its own terms into something she was proud of.
She called her mother in Zimbabwe every Sunday. She planted a small garden in her backyard that she tended alone early in the mornings before the children woke up, and she found something in that quietness that she had not known she was missing. 2 years after that Tuesday afternoon in the kitchen, Amara sat at that same table, the furniture from the delivery finally arranged properly around her, and she thought about Sena, not with hatred, not with longing, with something more complicated and honest, grief for a friendship that had been built on sand, and for the version of herself who had trusted so completely that she had not questioned it for 7 years. She thought about the first message, the one that said she was easy to get close to because she was lonely and needed a friend. She thought, I was not weak, I was human, and she was the one who chose to use that against me. There is something important in that distinction, because women are often told that their trust is naivety, that their openness is foolishness, that if they are betrayed, it is partly because they should have known better. Amara refused that. She had loved well and completely, and the failure belonged entirely to the person who took that gift and sold it. The last thing Amara heard about Sena came in the 3rd year from a woman she had briefly known through Sena's social circle. Sena seemed it tried to form a similar close friendship with another woman in Ghana, and that woman, perhaps because she was more guarded, or perhaps because Sena had grown careless, found out within months what Sena was doing. The story spread quietly, like these things do in close-knit communities. Sena had lost that friendship too, and the one before it. A person who builds their relationships on surveillance and report eventually has no relationships at all. They hollow out everything they touch. Amara heard this and felt something she had not expected. Not satisfaction exactly, but a kind of sad recognition. Sena had spent 7 years watching Amara's life instead of building her own. And now, with nothing left to report and no one left to report to, what did she have? The emptiness of a life lived in service of other people's destruction is its own punishment. It does not need Amara's bitterness to complete it. Amara poured herself a cup of tea and looked out at the small garden she had planted, the one she tended alone in the early mornings. The children were already awake, she could hear them upstairs, arguing cheerfully about something small and unimportant. Kofi was in the shower. The day was just beginning. She thought about how close she had come to not having this, how precisely and persistently someone had worked to dismantle what she was sitting inside right now, how many times the interference had nearly succeeded, how many arguments had nearly become the last one, how many of Kofi's withdrawals had nearly become permanent, how many of her own doubts had nearly become decisions. It had not worked, not because the betrayal was not severe enough. It had been severe enough. It had not worked because Amara, in the end, had been harder to break than Sena had calculated, and because Kofi, when faced with the truth, had chosen her. She sipped her tea. Outside, the garden was catching the morning light. She was still here, and that, in the end, was the only answer that mattered. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the people you have trusted, the friendships you have invested in, the quiet moments when something felt slightly wrong and you told yourself you were imagining it, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had someone in your life who turned out to be something completely different from who you thought they were? How did you handle it? What did it teach you? Because Amara's story is not unique. It happens in silence, in kitchens, in phone screens left unlocked for just a moment too long. And the people it happens to deserve to know they are not alone, and they are not foolish for having loved. If this story reached you, please give it a like. It helps more people find stories like this one. And if you are new here, subscribe, because every week we bring you real, emotional, powerful African stories that remind you what it means to be human. Thank you for watching. Take care of the people who are real and trust your instinct when it whispers.